Hi, I'm Matt Fairchild with Horizontal Integration, VP of Technology. I'm presenting with, there we go, Barry, Director of Technology from Pods. I'm going to spend a little bit of time telling you about Pods, a little bit of time telling you about horizontal integration, and then we're going to go through, at a high level, kind of the work that we've done for them and then for a couple of our other clients in using Sitecore 9 in Azure PaaS. So I think the most important thing that affects us in the next 30 minutes to know about Pods is that they're based out of Tampa, and there was some weather over there. And so Barry's not here. So I'm going to play both parts of Barry today. Me and Barry, it'll be great. Actually, if I can pause for a second here. I want to take a picture of him, so he would be standing about here. Okay, thank you. So Pods, big boxes people put in their driveways for moving, for storage. They're kind of the biggest in the box moving industry, with some facts on the screen. That was his slide. My slide, horizontal integration has been around for about 15 years. We're a full service digital agency, so we do digital strategy, user experience design. We've been doing Sitecore development since basically we started. We have about 200 employees, offices headquartered in Minneapolis, Dallas, 2 offices in India and 1 in Dubai. So we've done the Sitecore thing about 100 times at this point. We've been a platinum partner for, I think, since they made it. So that's us. The one thing that I try to do when I give presentations is come up with some sort of inspiration for it or a muse or something like that. We've done digital marketing has 99 problems. Are you one? Based on Jay-Z, and something about confidence and commerce or something based on Demi Lovato, which I wasn't a fan of, but now she's right in my Spotify playlist, right underneath Cannibal Corpse. Today I kind of went looking for some pop culture icons that could really, speak to, what it's like to move into the cloud. So I have a short video. It's classic. Barry was going to sing along at this part. So that's going to be stuck in your mind all day. Just kind of the arc of our story, we're going to go through the infrastructure that we put together at a high level, talk about some moving pieces. We're going to talk about how we have automated the provisioning of all the infrastructure. And then there's 10 things to consider when you're kind of going down this path. What we're going to talk about is what we did with pods, as I said, which was really kind of based in one region. And then since then, we've expanded. We have a couple clients that we're putting together something that has the Sitecore content delivery services in a bunch of different regions around the world. So we'll talk through that. So the infrastructure for pods, basically, they're in the South Central region, and then they have a on-prem ERP in Tampa, which was part of why Barry isn't here, because it's on-prem. So what we've extended then for 2 other clients is we have a primary region in North US. We started using the South Central to have a DR strategy for the content management services. And then in France and Singapore and mainland China, we put CD services, which we'll talk about. They were separated from the CM services. The Chinese implementation is in the Azure run by 21 Vianet, which we'll talk about some of the things that don't actually exist there, which makes it a little bit interesting. We'll just talk about high-level traffic routing quick. For pods, it was super simple. They had Encapsula that went down to a traffic manager. We're using a traffic manager we're doing blue-green deployments. So we're using the traffic manager to point to blue or green, and then that goes down to the app services. I'm syncing 2 computers. My notes are on a separated computer, so this is fun. So in a global environment where you're in a bunch of different Azure regions, we start with a traffic manager that's basically determining geolocation and pointing to the right region, the closest region to the user that's hitting it. And then each region has a traffic manager that then does the blue-green selection, and then goes through Azure Application Gateway and then hits the Sitecore app services. One of the things that we did was, because everything's scripted, we added, in Application Insights, we're doing availability checks. So should an Azure region ever actually go down, not that that ever happens, except for a couple times in the last couple weeks, we can run a script to modify the traffic manager to just take that region out of consideration and push it somewhere else. So just a little bit about the infrastructure. So this is kind of a pod of our content delivery services, and we take this and we replicate it in each of the Azure regions in France and Singapore and China, and then one lives in North America. So it kind of starts with the application gateway. There's only one. The diagram has 2, but that's okay. And then we have 2 content delivery services that are auto-scaling. So we'll have 2 minimum, and then they can auto-scale from there. And then each set of the content delivery servers have their own web database, and they have their own core database. And so we have a core database that's kind of in the CM region, which is on the next slide, that kind of does the traditional core database things. So it has users and the modules that are in the installation and things like that. The core database in the CD regions are really just there. Everything there is just deployed through TDS. So we have the modules information for the CD servers. And then the links, we moved the links. They're now managed in the web database. And then the link manager is updated during a deployment. So it's a little different, but it was somewhat important to make it actually work. So like I said, with the blue-green deployments, we have a set for each one. It's a shared Redis for session state. So on a deployment, we'll deploy to our content management services and have a content freeze, basically. And then we'll deploy to all the content delivery servers. Then we will publish to all of them and then run our automated regression tests and then script the traffic managers to make that go live. And then, like I said, we have these in 5 regions kind of scattered around the world. In the content management side of things, it's a lot more traditional. So you have your basic content management services, content management, reporting, processing, publishing, and then we've taken 2 app services and put all the marketing automation, operations and reporting like services and XConnect search like services in one app service. And then we put the XConnect collections and reference data like services in another app service. So if we need to scale that out into their own app services, we do. But depending on traffic and everything, we may not need that. And then all the databases are in one Azure SQL Server because that's kind of where they're put from those Quickstart templates. And then if we need to move those out, we do after load testing and things like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that we go through for provisioning this. And I think the most important thing when you're trying to do this is you have to script everything because you don't want CD services in different parts of the world acting differently. So we kind of broke it up into 4 major chunks, and we use a combination of ARM templates and a lot of PowerShell. So we kind of start with, here, actually, there's a slide for that. We start with the global parameters. So we kind of have a JSON config file that we put together that has the subscription ID and what Azure regions we want everything to be in. If we want to add any additional application insights to it that are more than what's in the ARM templates by default, we add those. We set up the Sitecore topology and the licensing, and then just name resources, storage accounts, things like that. And then we have a process that just takes that JSON file and does a validation on it to say, well, before you actually go to Azure and do this, let's make sure that, Patrick didn't do something wrong. No offense. So the next step is running the script to deploy all the prerequisites. So resource group storage, setting up the key vaults and managing that. So all credentials are in key vaults, nothing in deployments or config files. And then we provision the build and deployment environment. The goal is to automate the automation of the deployments. So we'll be writing scripts to set up our build and deployment environments. Right now, they're all manual because that was going to take a lot of time. So our base build and deployments process is based on TeamCity. We use Artifactory and then Octopus Deploy, and then I don't have the logo, but we use TDS to move data up and down lower environments and into production. And then we use the Azure Quickstart ARM templates. We have modified them for a couple of reasons. We modified them basically to separate the CM and the CD services. So we can make a module out of the CD services and we can run it all over the world. Yeah, so the CM services contain CM reporting, processing, all the XConnect services, and the Azure Search, which I didn't talk about, but we'll talk about later. And then that CD template just contains the CD services, the web database, and core database, and Redis. So the last thing we do is basically, the ARM templates have gone out and created all these services all over the place, and so we have a bunch of PowerShell to go through and say, okay, so what are all the IP addresses of all these services that you just created, and what are they, and who should they talk to? So because this is PaaS and not DMZ or something like that, we lock it down to just the services in Sitecore that need to talk to each other in the specific databases. So everything's locked down to just the IPs that they need to see. We had the bindings for the sites. We script out the traffic managers and the WAFs, add the application insights, additional things that we need to add to it for availability, like I talked about. Get SSL and TLS all set up. And then we locked all the resource groups down, so you can't change it from the UI. Basically, we want code to do everything. If you want to fix something, fix that, or fix the configuration, but don't go in and change things manually, because the next time we run the script, it's just going to wipe it out. So you have to get through deploying infrastructure just like deploying your code. It's exactly the same thing. Application services or insights. I think I talked about that a lot, so I'm just going to keep going. So this is kind of the provisioning process. Obviously, there's a lot of code behind that, but I'm not going to go through all the code because there's a lot of code. Some of it's still in process. So there's kind of top 10. When you sit down to plan this out, there's top 10 things that you should be paying attention to. And then I added and top 10, and then 10 PowerPoint presentations that I've never used before. There's one. Licensing is a thing in Sitecore. It's gotten way better this year. So we used to have to count all the non-prod servers and then say, okay, well, we can only have 2 in QA, and so we have to put all these services together and then this over there. And with the change to environmental licensing in July, everything got better. And so that makes things good. I like that. If you don't have subscription licensing and maybe you have a subscription license from before July, it's worth maybe talking to somebody about changing that, because then you can make UAT look like production and you're not trying to solve something in France in production, because, well, France. So there's another one. You really have to think through your Sdlc. So chances are if you're deploying CD services all over the world, that you're working with a global client, and they probably have maybe a couple different marketing teams around the world. So just think through that when you're thinking through your infrastructure, especially in your lower environments. And then also make sure that you are building in test automation, unit tests, automated regression testing, and everything is super important, especially as you're doing all this so you can get to market faster. If you have to go through a 3-week regression test, you're not getting to market faster. So work that into your Sdlc. There's one. So globally, what are your global needs? Clearly, this actual Sitecore implementation and doing globalization with language fallback and all those things that I'm not going to talk about right now, but you need to think about that, but also make sure that, obviously, that you have a CDN and where you're going to put your content delivery services. And then your content management services have to be in one region. So where should it go? You have to, where are most of your users, and then make sure that you tune it to work, hopefully, better around the world. Content management. Oh, I worked ahead. Look at that. Yeah, when you're implementing your content tree, get global reuse out of your content. If you have 27 sites in 27 different languages managed by 3 different marketing teams, do it right, care about your content editor. That's kind of, as in all things in life, care about your content editor. And then there's one. So I left this blank because I figured, bye, Bridget. I left this blank because I figured I'd come up with something else that I needed to talk about in this, and I did. So search providers. So if you're running in PaaS, you probably don't want to install a bunch of VMs for Solar. So in pods, we used Azure Search for the internal Sitecore indexes, which performed pretty well. I was kind of surprised when I saw the load testing on those indexes. So just for the Sitecore indexes, it performed okay. We happened to be lucky in that the 2 clients that we took globally already had Coveo Cloud, so that was nice. Coveo Cloud, like that. And then Pods itself didn't have a site search because they have like 3 different sizes of boxes. So we didn't have to really implement search on the site at all. So the one thing, I guess, if you're putting things in China, in Azure, they don't have Azure Search. So if you end up putting your CM services in China, you're going to probably need Solar or something like that to run those search indexes. Or we've thought about maybe calling Azure Search in Taiwan, but the Great Firewall of China, I don't know, it seems we have to do some load testing through the firewall. So speaking of load testing, do it all the time. Do it. We scale our lower environments out, and we actually scaled out QA, so we could do load testing before we put it into UAT. So by the time our client is looking at it and agreeing to it, it actually works, and it's fast. So do it pretty much all the time. And then also do it in production when you can. You definitely want to exercise your auto-scaling, both up and down, to make sure that those app services, when under load, actually come up correctly and then come down correctly. Branching strategy. Oddly enough, I didn't come up with this picture. One of our designers did, and I have a blue Great Dane that looks exactly like that, so it's kind of weird. She also called it branch strategy instead of branching strategy, so that's fun. So the one thing, everybody has branching strategies. The one thing that became complicated for us when we're doing, not pods, but one of the other clients, is that they did have 3 marketing teams around the world, and they didn't want to be blocked by each other, so we put in swim lanes. And so having a branching strategy to manage swim lanes, so we kind of go with, here's the planned work, and then you can have unplanned things, but you can only have 2 unplanned things at a time. And if you have more than that, then plan more. And then I think I've said the word automation 1,000 times, but that's a thing. We should do it. People are slow. Computers aren't. And computers make less mistakes than I do, usually. So automate everything. We talked a lot about traffic routing. I won't go into that detail again, but traffic routing globally is really important to plan through. And make sure you're, again, testing the scripting of the routing, because if you screw up your routing, you kind of don't have a website. So that's not good. And then the last thing is, I guess, a little awkward at this point, because Barry was going to say something good about HI, and he's not here. So I'll just say this. If you go to implement something like this, definitely leave time to do it, because it's not going to happen right the first time. All that infrastructure scripting takes time, and it takes time to test. But if you do go about it alone, I'd recommend maybe not going about it alone. Find somebody that's done it before, and at least get some details from them, and then if you want to go off and do it. But I think having experience in not only provisioning it, but maintaining it and reacting to outages in the appropriate way, that's operations, that's everything. So that's it. That's all, folks. I guess we can take some questions if you have any. I have 2 solution architects from HI that can also help me answer some of the questions, because he wrote the code and I didn't. So if anybody has any questions.
Hello. I have a question about the web application firewall. Have you used it? I've heard that there are some issues with OWASP rules not being able to be disabled in the WAF implementation for application gateway.
Yeah. Do you have?
That being said, it was region specific. We didn't find a lot of issues in the US regions, but some of the regions in China, there were issues, and I think it's still under development stage. So I don't know if I answered your question correctly, but yes, there are some known issues with some of this, and we generally try to rely on third-party web application firewalls like Encapsula to help us out, so we are still under conversations with them.
Yeah, the Azure WAF is deploying in December, so we'll maybe find that. But the intent is to see.
One last question. Yeah. Is this Sitecore 8 implementation?
9.
Sitecore 9.
Sitecore 9?
I would.
That's a very good question, and a tricky question too. So the only place for pods where login identity was managed was in the content management region. Globally, we only had one content management region, which was the United States. So all of the regions were connecting to the same core database. Now, if you see in the presentation, what you will find out is the core database has been separated. Ideally, in most instances, you'll have an application pointing to the same core database. We had to distribute it. So a couple of important things. One, all the core database does not have the same information, which means the content management core database holds all your Sitecore users. So that's your central region. But each and every delivery cluster does also have a core database, which is separated out. And we use TDS to push any configuration, like some modules which you install, they have some sort of configuration in core database, we push it out. And the other part where the link manager was default points to the core database has to be moved out for link management. So that's how we solve that.
And what about deployment, about Azure deployment? Are you using VSTS, Azure DevOps, or what exactly for your code deployment?
TeamCity and Octopus Deploy, and Artifactory, JFrog.
Okay, thanks.
I'm just taking over, man. I know you know all the answers, so you can, You told me assistance, and I just took the mic.
It's fine.
Hi, you talked about automated testing. Wanted to know, like, are there any, first of all, which framework you use, and second of all, are there any best practices in terms of Sitecore to achieve that?
Yeah, so the automated testing framework that we use from QA, not part of what developers should do, is we use Selenium. And we're using, we kind of set up generalized tests. So we use the Sitecore API to go give me every page. Now go to every page and do all the front end testing, make sure it's returning 200s and things like that. And then we kind of call those non-obtrusive things that are part of the smoke test. And then some of the more obtrusive things, like going in and having it add a component to a page and remove it or something like that. We run those in QA and UAT, but not as a smoke test in production. So Selenium is the short answer to that.
Is that done through PowerShell scripts on Azure?
It's kicked off from Octopus Deploy. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is related to indexes. So we are very heavily leveraging Solar indexes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a two-part question. One is, how do you deploy the Solar instances when you have an Azure PaaS? I heard you mentioning VMs, so I want to understand a little bit more. And secondly, how do you sync your database and the indexes at the same time?
Take that.
Okay, sure. So the first part of the question is you are heavily relying on Solar today. Now, with Azure PaaS, Solar can be deployed in a couple of different ways. One of the ways is a pretty standard. You have your VMs, and then install Solar, and for high availability, you have a master-slave configuration. You could use Zookeeper to replicate. Now, there is other options which is growing heavily, and I have seen some enterprise solutions on it. Is known as Search Stacks. It's a cloud-based Solar provider, which means that it gives you, it's a service, and you could leverage that, so you don't have to manage the infrastructure. All you get is a Solar endpoint. You can configure your indexes and things like that. So if you're heavily using it, that would be one point to look at it. If you're on Azure PaaS, that VMs is the route, but you kind of have to have the management side of it, and it kind of gets complicated when you have Azure PaaS and IaaS. So I would recommend that looking at Search Stacks. It's really growing, and I have seen solutions on that, and it's pretty impressive. Now, second part of the question is synchronization of indexes, and I could talk 45 minutes on that, right? So at a high level, two things I would like to mention is if you are paying attention on one of the slides, it shows that all delivery clusters run on their own web databases. So the whole idea is the centralized indexing management. So what happens is one of the indexing strategies, when you publish your content from master to web, at that point your index gets updated. So index get updated globally, a single shot when the publishing happens. Now, ideally you don't want to publish to just a region, like, okay, I just want to publish to United States, because it's a global site. So what you do is you intercept the publishing pipeline using publishing service, and the publish operations publishes to all the targets at the same time. So the index is already available. Now, second thing is, I would like to really, many people have questions like Azure Search does not perform well, and Azure Search has issues. The issue is not with the search platform itself. The issue is the implementation of the indexes. So a lot of the solutions I have seen in my life have heavy computed index fields for no reason, and it queries a lot of items in the databases and causes a lot of issues. So keep your indexes lean. Out of the box, Sitecore indexes everything, and you never need everything. So figure out what you need and index low. At any given point in time, I have seen that I'm almost certain now, after so many applications, that you can reduce your indexing size by 70% because most of the times you don't need that data. And if you do need it, your code can obviously call the databases to get the items. So keep your indexes lean, keep it short, and that way you can achieve. And as far as redundancy in indexes, you have multiple strategies, and Sitecore is good about having an abstract provider, which means that it's not dependent on a particular search provider. You could use Solar, you could use Azure, or you could use Coveo for that matter. So I feel that that should help you out. But again, if you have further questions, certainly I can talk on this topic. You know, we are in booth 301, so we can reach out there.
Hi. I would want to know if there is any load test service provided in Azure, or asked differently, how are you doing your load tests?
So this is. It's working. Okay, sorry. Patrick here. For load testing and stuff, we use JMeter to do that. So we just have custom scripts that we write. And so after the deployment, it's not on. Oh, there it is. Maybe I'm just holding. Yeah, we use JMeter to write the scripts, and then after the deployment, we can execute those. We usually execute that in the lower environment. I believe we mentioned QA. We have the fully scaled out, so we can do the load testing there.
And to just supplement that answer, yes, we use it in the Azure environment. And whenever we do load testing, initially, our plan is to do it in a mirrored environment. So we have a mirrored lower tier environment, such as QA or staging. And in that environment, the script basically starts with first running a series of automated tests to make sure that the code compiled. But the next step is really looking at the stress levels, at what stress levels we find our response time dropping. And that generally gives us an idea if our recent code has done some unknown issue in it. So, for example, generally response times stay under 1800 milliseconds, but if it was to go above that at a particular hit rate, for example, 500 concurrent users, at that point we figure out. So, really to answer your question, only in disaster recovery scenarios we try out auto scaling and see can it scale, and those configurations have to be enabled. So for example, in delivery we constantly hit it, but we generally keep it at a stress testing level. And the other part really is we want to make sure it is automated. And all the time, load testing can be very tricky to automate it all the times. So we have triggers built in, and we don't do, like for subsequent deployments, we don't do full-blown load testing, we do stress testing, and we try to see if the breaking point has reached, and that's what it determines that our code has done something malicious or not.
Okay. Yeah. My question is regards to Azure SQL databases. I think my question will be in two parts. How do you determine the DTU or the tier to select, by default, for Sitecore 9? And if there's no direct answer for that, what is the recommended DTU to select? Standard, premium, and which tier?
That generally Sitecore has recommendations on it, and depending upon the size of your solution, this answer could vary. I have seen standard, I have seen premium, and I have seen actual implementations where we failed and we had to increase the connections to avoid the timeout. So really the question, the answer is Sitecore could say that you could start with standard and then you could constantly evolve that, and sometimes the unfortunate situation with Azure SQL is you cannot do it real time when your traffic is kind of spiking up. It has to be done pre-planned. So trying to go with premium and it doesn't impact your monthly cost, I would say go with premium. But again, there are different answers I see. But standard is you can start with standard, and depending upon your traffic size, you can kind of figure it out. And again, implementation could also cost some of that. How many times you're really hitting your databases, and that's where indexing strategies come into place. One golden mantra as development teams I generally advise is don't rely on databases too much. Try to abstract as much information on an application start, try indexing and some of the other mechanisms. So that should solve that.
On your blue slot, green slot configuration, are you deploying your builds to an existing CD, or are you blowing up the CD and rebuilding the whole server along with the build in that process?
We're blowing it up and rebuilding it, that was kind of a debate that we had. Are we going to use deployment slots, or are we going to burn it down and redeploy it to a new service? And we're blowing it up and redeploying it. So.
And are you still able to maintain a zero downtime kind of release doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's one question here.
So when you switch slots, how do you know what slot you're on to use the sticky settings, or like how do you know which one's the production slot now versus was the stage, so on and so forth?
That's a good question.
No, I would like to just repeat your question to make sure that I understood right.
He wants
So
to
your
know which one
question
is live, blue or green.
Yeah, so first of all, there are certain probing techniques which allow us to understand there is always going to be an active cluster which is going to be live. So whenever we are about to start deployment, obviously you start with the green deployment and ensure that the box is up and running. Now, the connection swap which happens between a blue and green really depends upon some of the state management requirements and on the project. So server draining is one of the options we have tried. We drain the connections before pushing it out. And there is a momentary transitionary period, at least today, what I have seen, where the uptime can be impacted in that area. So
we're going through a test right now to make sure that a shared Redis keeps the sessions and hands them off.
Okay.
again, as I said, as to Matt's point, it depends upon the implementation to, are you having a lot of information in your shared session? And if that's the case, then we still need to maintain, especially with the contacts and all of the interactions and the IDs which are stored in cookie, and we have to make sure there's a way for us to transfer over to the other cluster. So I think there is a little bit of gray area still with especially 9.0 and the way XConnect is saving it. So we're just hoping we'll get more answers on that. So still a little bit of gray area, I guess.
Okay, yeah, we use sticky settings, but that helped a little. Thanks.
Yes, just regarding the blue-green deployment, do you manage also the CM as a blue-green instance? And also, if not, how do you handle the indexing since the CM is the same for those two deployment slots?
Yeah, we tried doing the blue-green for content management, and it just doesn't really work very well. There's a lot of database backups, and it's not really meant to do that. So we kind of took the approach of what is the point of a blue-green deployment, and it's not to affect the public visitors to your site. So we accepted that on the CD side, and then on the CM side, we just
have a downtime.
Yeah, and then if we have to roll back, we have to roll back. But there's strategies for that.
So one of the other part is, really as long as the eventing architecture stays with Sitecore, it is going to be a complicated affair, and the reliance on event queues to manage some of that updates, right? So the real answer to that is you could kind of have a blue-green CM environment, but at some point you'll have to hold a freeze. Like a freeze could be a content management freeze. For a certain amount of time, your content management does not update any content, and then you can do rollbacks and restores. But for the level of effort required, we didn't see many advantages. So it was easy. So sometimes, when a problem occurs, either it's a technology solution or a process solution. I strongly believe that is a process thing. You have to deal it with processes, and we have been successfully saying that during the deployment phases, which generally happens, off hours, the content management is left alone. Okay. And mainly blue-green, our intent was to make sure high uptime for our customers, and that's the delivery cluster. So that's there.
Do you have any more? No? That's it. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.